How does Vladimir Nabokov write his novels? Because many of us have heard that he composed his novels on index cards, but today we are going to dive much deeper and hear Nabokov speak at length on his entire process from start to finish. And Nabokov is one of the literary goats, and that's why I cover him extensively here on Right Conscious. And so if you look at the playlist down below, you will find many videos just like this that will help you dive deeper into Nabokov's books, his mind, and his process. But enough for me, excuse me. Let us now hear from Nabokov. All I know is that at the very early stage of the novel's development, I get this urge to collect bits of straw and fluff and to eat pebbles. Nobody will ever discover how clearly a bird visualizes, or if it visualizes at all, the future nest and the eggs in it. When I remember afterwards the force that made me jot down the correct names of things, or the inches and tints of things, even before I actually needed the information, I'm inclined to assume that what I call, for want of a better term, inspiration, had already been at work, mutely pointing at this or that, having me accumulate the known materials for an unknown structure. I feel a kind of gentle development, an uncurling inside, and I know that the details are there already, that in fact I would see them plainly if I looked closer, if I stopped the machine and opened its inner compartment. But I prefer to wait until what is loosely called inspiration has completed the task for me. And we'll get to more in a second, but this is a magnificent perspective from Nabokov, and one I don't hear talked about very often, because there is a best-selling book called A Mind for Numbers, which talks about how you can approach learning math and science if you aren't very good at it. And its main thesis talks about how the unconscious is really what makes you good at math and science. That yes, you need to sit and put in deliberate effort, but then you need to shut off your mind completely and let your unconscious work on the problems, work on the memorization. But instead of focusing on one little thing you need to memorize, a novel is over 100,000 word document that has thousands of hours put into it. And so the unconscious is obviously an important thing, but Nabokov is saying here that the initial impetus, the initial force, is what carries the novel through. And if that is strong enough, then your entire unconscious will start informing a structure around the work before you even get started. And listen to the terminology that he is saying, everyone. A gentle unraveling. This transcends the idea of writing 1,600 words a day like Stephen King. This goes beyond National Novel Writing Month. And this taps into the real process of art, which is something that flowers over time into something beautiful. And so I get it. You want to get your first draft of your novel done as fast as possible, and that's okay. And I think that you should do that. But before you start that process, you should be living with that idea in your head. It should have already been formed and worked through, whether on paper or in your head, so that when you sit down to write the first draft, it isn't that hard. You're not sitting and wondering or having to tap into your unconscious necessarily at all, because you've already explored the entire maze. And your conscious mind can get down what it needs to get down on the first go round. So I know many authors who can get a first draft done in 1 to 3 months, but sometimes they sit for years with problems. And this is, I think, why Cormac McCarthy is such a great author, because he always worked on 4 to 5 different novels at once, and his unconscious was working on these novels, and he gave himself an unlimited amount of time. He revised and worked on The Passenger for over 60 years. He worked on Suttree for over 20 years. He worked on All the Pretty Horses and those works. I mean, he wrote them down originally in an initial draft 15 years before they ever came out. The same goes with many novels. Sometimes someone writes down a fragment or has this idea and they have to put it away. And I think this is why the Kindle graveyard mentality, the right to market mentality has been so taxing on authors in the modern era, is that people think that every idea needs to be sent to the press immediately. Because if you're going to spend 3,000 to 5,000 hours revising a novel, you want to make sure it's good. You want to make sure it's the correct idea, because sometimes someone has a really strong idea and they think they need to go on this journey with it and they get stuck. I know countless people, countless of you guys who are stuck on their novel right now, who can't dedicate the time or get the energy going. And it's because your idea was most likely a diversionary idea, something that was supposed to lead you down some other rabbit hole to give you some little piece of perspective and gold, but not to make the entire show And I like that Nabokov evokes the bird. He says that nobody will ever discover how clearly a bird visualizes. Many of the greatest artists and spiritual leaders of all time, like Rodin and Rilke and shamans and the Taoists, they all understood that if you want to see the invisible, if you want to go into the unconscious, then you have to see more of the visible. We have to penetrate inside the visible and be able to see it from the fourth and the fifth dimension. We must gain prescience, and animals have this ability of pure sight. And for us as artists, that is what we are trying to get through with our work. And if you look at any of these people who I just talked about, every single one of them would say that it took them years to be able to attain this power. It took them years to be able to interface between the conscious and the unconscious. This isn't something that happens overnight or even in the first decade or even the first 2 decades of your artistic career some of the time. And this is just a side note. Sometimes you see people, maybe you're on Substack, and I'm on Substack. If you guys are in the literary renaissance and want to write on the best platform for writers in 2025, you need to be on Substack. If you want to read some of my writing, I'm releasing daily stuff on my Substack all of the time. But sometimes on Substack, I see people who have this beautiful access to the unconscious, who are great writers. And this is a little tidbit for you. We have to take a small break from Nabokov because this is important. And they write these beautiful metaphors, and you feel like they're these powerful writers because they are. But something I've noticed is that the non-creative, the person who doesn't have access to their unconscious and has to gain that through force and through work and connection and patience and persistence, those are the people who are more successful in the long run, because I have talked to and known countless writers and artists over the last 12 years. And when I think of all those talented people I know, most of them have given up. Most of them have moved on to something else, are on drugs, have gotten married, and they're too whimsical to sit down and be able to do that, to sit down and be consistent, because they have this talent to be able to access their unconscious, to see perfectly. But it is a skill that you can attain, and if you do it the hard way, then you will always have that. And so now we're turning back to Nabokov. After the first shock of recognition, a sudden sense of, this is what I'm going to write, the novel starts to breed by itself. The process goes on solely in the mind, not on paper. And to be aware of the stage it has reached at any given moment, I do not have to be conscious of every exact phrase. There comes a moment when I am informed from within that the entire structure is finished. All I have to do now is take it down in pencil or pen. Since this entire structure, dimly illumined in one's mind, can be compared to a painting, and since you do not have to work gradually from left to right for its proper perception, I may direct my flashlight at any part or particle of the picture when setting it down in writing. I do not begin my novel at the beginning. I do not reach chapter 3 before I reach chapter 4. I do not go dutifully from one page to the next in consecutive order. No, I pick out a bit here and a bit there till I have filled all the gaps on paper. And so this is a very interesting approach. I don't hear this talked about very often, that Nabokov is writing this totally out of order, that he sees the structure and he's just slowly filling in. It's almost like he's looking at the box of a jigsaw puzzle and is slowly putting it together, but isn't necessarily connected to doing it in the perfect order. And let me just say, the more kind of eccentric the process, the greater talent it requires for you to be able to maintain it and do well with it. Because there is a reason why that many writers just go into a room alone, get on a typewriter and start at point 1 and finish the first draft and finish the second draft and don't do anything fancy with dictation and note cards, as we're about to hear from Nabokov. But instead, Nabokov trusts his vision. And the shock when he finally realizes this is what I'm going to write. This is it. This is the scene. This is the novel. And so it's really interesting, because I want to go back to the impetus of this idea, because I see this almost like it starts as a dream world, like, and these images and colors, and then some more concrete things start to come in. But to allow this to happen means that you must be open to the idea that you are going to write a novel, that you have an intention to be a writer, that you have the skill and the ability and the time to sit down and do this, because many of us are perpetually in this state. But I don't think most people direct themselves and say, and have the discipline to say, that I'm going to sit here for a couple months and let all of this come together for as long as it takes. Because there are some people who have been doing this for years. There are some of you guys listening right now who have been trying to be a writer and have been working on your novel for over a decade. And that's okay, because I stopped writing my novel a couple years ago to focus on poetry and do other things. I'm at a standstill too, but in my standstill, I do not believe that I'm necessarily working on too many things for my novel. I've maybe had some small revelations, but until I direct my flashlight and keep it on an idea or on this intention, this loose intention, I don't get any ideas. And so right now, your life may be too cluttered. And this is maybe why your ideas aren't very good. This is why you're not breaking through. Because not to get too spiritual on you guys, but I truly do believe that if you have an idea and it sits with you and it's something beautiful like this, something legendary, that it's perfect, that it's meant to happen, that you've connected to the creative ether and you've been given a gift, you've been given an opportunity to write something beautiful. And we only receive so many gifts in our entire life. And the more you are open, the more you are ready to catch the big fish, as David Lynch would say, the better it's going to be and the better ideas you are going to have. Because you and I could sit down right now and come up with some good novel ideas. We could come up with some ideas that would make good novels. But you and I, want to write legendary novels. We want to write novels that people are going to love and great stories. And for that to happen, means that it has to be bigger than just a good plot. It has to have that unconscious connection. It has to have the darkness of the duende. It needs to scream to people's souls. And those types of ideas are given to those who are patient, given to those who are willing to, in most cases, act like a firecracker once they get it and just explode and finish it and just go 100% obsessive. Or on the flip side, someone who's willing to nurture it and take care of it, like Nabokov is advocating for it, at least in his own personal sense. But I've personally noticed that those are the two sides, that there are people when they get an idea and they want to do it and they're motivated. But then there are other people. And if you're on the other side, then you really just need to give yourself that space. And if you're a firecracker, this is like kind of like a Stephen King. That's why he sets down his novel for months, because you need to take a break from it so you can access it again with your unconscious, so that you can let these ideas and what you did ruminate in your head. Like I said, why do so many successful authors do this? Put it down for a while. It's because they're on the more aggressive side of the picture and know that's what they need to do. And so Nabokov's approach almost reminds me of some people's theory of how you should write a novel, that you should slowly do stream of consciousness type exercises, or just imagination exercises where you just sit and journal about your writing, just journal about your characters and what they are going to be doing and yada, yada, yada. And so that is a very nonlinear process and somewhat similar to what Nabokov is doing, because you're piecing together ideas from all across the map. And so I think there's a bit of truth to this. And I think for some people who try to go at their novel in a very logical way and fail, taking a more subjective perspective could be a good thing, because there are some people who are very woo and they need someone to tamper them down, to add punctuation, add transitions, and get them consistently in the chair. And then there are other people. And then there are more logical people who want to plot everything out and, get it done in a certain amount of time, who maybe if they slowed it down and had more fun with their unconscious and with brainstorming and that type of stuff, would benefit from it. And so I'll have to make more videos on all of this at a later time, but I think it's interesting that Nabokov, who I think is one of the GOATs and who has probably one of the more unique novel writing styles, is kind of an advocate of the slower side. Because when you read his prose, and we're talking about structure, so he's talking about structure here. Like, how the hell does the structure of Pale Fire manifest? How does the idea of John Shade and Cabote, or whatever that fake country's name is, come up? How do you even write the poem Pale Fire? What comes first, But, I think the more slow process is what real postmodernism is, and where real progress really happens. Because when we think of the iconic postmodern novel, Gravity's Rainbow, and let me just say I'm a huge Gravity's Rainbow fan, when I look at Pynchon, I see someone who's aggressively forming something that is chaotic, that is postmodern, that is trippy, that does have a weird structure. He's consciously kind of doing that and using kind of hidden mechanisms behind all of it to add some psychic weight. But Pale Fire, which one could say was kind of one of the main kickoffs of real postmodernist novels, that's what we want to call it, was first started in the mind of a 60-year-old, everyone. Nabokov was 60 years old when he created this intense, innovative structure. And so that also lends to the fact that you are probably decades away from your best work and that you shouldn't be scared or believe the hate online or not think you're good enough. Because if I release my novel right now, people will be like, see, this guy who's talking about writing, he's not great. We can discredit him now. But in actuality, that's actually a good thing because decades from now, I'll be, that novel is putting me a step closer to maybe writing something that is really, really good. So let us now continue with our quote. This is why I like writing my stories and novels on index cards, numbering them later when the whole set is complete. Every card is rewritten many times. About 3 cards make one typewritten page, and when finally I feel that the conceived picture has been copied by me as faithfully as physically possible, a few vacant lots always remain, alas. Then I dictate the novel to my wife, who types it out in triplicate. And so now, hopefully, this makes more sense because Nabokov will almost write a mini short story, a mini scene, this kind of feeling and this emotion, and number it away. And because it's in numerical order, then it's very easy to kind of put them in. He can think of this general structure in his mind, see this painting. And what makes this process interesting is that I'm sure there's a ton of switching. That number 27 actually ends up being number 33, or something for 33 gets moved into number 8 because it just sounds right. And being able to move things around like that, I think, is somewhat of an advantage because having, instead of, on your novel, like it's page 217, having a system like that does make it easier to memorize and easier to call back to things. And it's very reminiscent of David Lynch's process that he talks about of putting down 70 scenes on an index card. And so I think some of the main lessons that we need to take away from Nabokov aren't that you should be writing on index cards, but that rather we need to start contemplating our unconscious and our relationship to slowing down and speed, because most people don't realize that you can control that. Like literally, if you say and you put up intentions, whether in your head or on paper, or you just speak them out loud and say, hey, reality, speed things up, like make ideas, make life go faster, it will literally start going faster. It's really wild. And then if you ask it to slow it down, it can slow it down. And the same is true with your art. And that's what's really cool about like many artists and many people. And I think why spirituality and many people have actually, when you look at the bookshelf behind me, at the start of the 20th century, over 90% of people in Europe and in the West were proclaimed Christians. But when I look at the greatest 20th century authors, and now that number sits around 65%, easily over 50% of the best authors of the 21st century and the 20th century were not any of the major religions, or at least practicing members. And that's because they found different ways of viewing reality and could not, and didn't want to be constrained by religion. And this is why so many people like Mishima and other authors and artists have such wacky politics, is because at some level, religion and politics is giving your power away to someone else to control how you and your family perceive reality. And if you are an artist, someone who creates worlds and creates realities already, you may scratch your head and be like, hey, why am I doing that? And I understand why people do that. We don't need to get into the benefits of religion and having a transcendent in your life. But I think that no matter what religion you are or how you feel, that understanding how reality works and first and foremost having a unique perspective on reality will ensure that your novels are interesting and that you'll stand out from other people. There's an awesome member of this community. She's on Substack too. Her name is Laura, and she writes the craziest comments sometimes. She writes crazy posts, and when you talk to her, if you send her a message right now, the way you could ask her like, hey, did you just have a cup of coffee? Or like, what's your favorite coffee? And the way she'll describe her favorite cup of coffee will like blow your mind, and like that sticks in your head. But she sees reality differently. And it's not just good for her writing, it makes you want to talk to her. It makes you want to be involved with her because it's not just the everyday typical person. That's probably why you are interfacing still with me right now. I am not like the other booktubers. And so boom, there it is. There we have it. This is a knowledge drop on Nabokov. I want you to finish your novel. When I'm talking about this, you guys, I'm getting emotional. I'm like, dude, I got to get back on my novel. I have some poetry projects to take care of, but I am itching to get back into my novel. And so there you have it. Have a great day, and I will see you guys tomorrow.